righty. Well, listen, everybody, we're really excited about this webinar series that we're kicking off here with AutoRABIT and Greenstone. My name is Michael Hornsby, and I am the Vice President of Public Sector. I also have another hat. I'm a field CIO. As a background as a CIO and spent many years at Salesforce, I've got a whole bunch of stories that I could tell about the topic that we're going to cover today. As you'll hear, like a lot of organizations have really struggled in the past just to deploy Salesforce in one environment. And today we're going to talk about how many organizations really have to now manage multiple orgs, dozens of environments, and a shared code base that serves several business partners. That's the challenge that Joe Robinette and his team tackle every day at Greenstone Farm Credit Services. Today, Joe is going to show us how he built a deployment strategy that balances speed, control, and collaboration using AutoRABIT. So Joe, welcome, and thanks for joining us. Please,
yes, thank you.
Share your background, share a little bit about your background and your role at Greenstone.
Yeah, so let me get this going. I've been in software development for almost 20 years now. I've kind of done a lot of different hats and roles, from software testing to becoming an accidental developer, going from software testing in Salesforce to Salesforce development. I did that for almost 7 years. In the last just over 3 years now, I've been on the DevOps team at Greenstone, just kind of managing the Salesforce environments, sandboxes, deployments, trying to constantly improve and make things better and easier with our deployment processes. I've been at Greenstone for just over 4 years now as a full-time employee, and almost 5 since I started as a contractor. So,
well, fantastic. Well, let's get right into your story, because I don't want to waste any more time. This is a really timely topic for lots of organizations, and hopefully some folks that are on the call will learn some really important lessons from you today.
Yeah, good deal. So we'll do a little bit of background here about Greenstone and how it's all set up and works. So Greenstone Farm Credit Services, we're a member-owned cooperative with more than 29,000 members. We serve Michigan and a little piece of Wisconsin for things like land financing, agricultural loans, crop insurance, tax services for people and businesses that have loans with us. We're headquartered in East Lansing, Michigan. I am not in Lansing. I'm in Central Ohio by Dayton, but I'm up in Lansing every other month.
And I think I don't know if we're losing some of your audio there, Joe.
Oh,
feels like we're losing some audio.
Yeah, let me switch. Okay, does this sound any better?
It does sound better now, yes.
Okay. Yeah, so I'll just back up a real second. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Yeah. So Greenstone, we do agricultural loans, crop insurance, tax services for our customers that have loans with us. Serve primarily Michigan, but also a little piece of Wisconsin there in the Northeast. We're headquartered in Lansing, Michigan. I'm in Central Ohio, so I'm up in Michigan about every other month for a week or so in the offices.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and get right into the meat of the story here.
Yeah. One of the things that makes Greenstone, our IT department, unique is this collaboration we have. So we call it the Centric Technology Collaboration with 6 other associations, 6 other farm credit associations, where Greenstone provides the kind of a foundational Salesforce metadata and customizations, and also .NET applications as well. So we send that foundation, the CTC Foundation, to 6 associations, including Greenstone itself. And that means there's a lot of environments to handle, a lot of sandboxes. I'll kind of go over our pipeline and Salesforce architecture set up in a few slides here. But it's, 8 production orgs, because the CTC Foundation does have its own production instance. And AutoRABIT just really helps with managing all of that. Being able to deploy from one Salesforce instance to another and that kind of stuff. It makes it manageable and scalable too. As you can see, like if we were to add on another association, it wouldn't be a whole lot of work to update some of the pipelines to just send the CTC code to it.
It sounds like a classic shared services model. And you see this a lot in organizations when they get more and more complex. So tell me about one of the biggest challenges you faced like early on when you had to manage so many environments.
Yeah, just trying to wrap our heads around it all, really. We have been live with Salesforce for almost 4 years now, I believe. So just kind of that initial setup, the initial like how do you manage when you have all these Salesforce instances? They have their own sandboxes and stuff. Like how do you even go about with the deployments and with setting it all up? We did have a consulting partner to help implement that, and they led us to AutoRABIT. But then just kind of working with them to just identify the pipeline and like how it all flows, right? It was just kind of the biggest challenge, just getting started with it and figuring out like what it all looks like.
Right. And then you of course having to bring consistency to the process, control to the process, those kinds of things, right?
Yep. Yeah. And that's one of the other big benefits of AutoRABIT is just the consistency, right? If you have the CI jobs doing deployments, they're all set up the same, they're all do the same thing, they're all kind of triggered by the same thing. They just go to different places, and that consistency allows us to get away from any manual deployments as well, because when you're doing stuff manually, there's always the chance of mistakes.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, let's get into it.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about our Salesforce architecture. So to start with, we do use Encino. So we have, the Financial Services Cloud, then we have Encino on top of that. We have that CTC foundational code base that we build on top of Encino, and we send that, to our partner associations, but then they customize their own Salesforce instance on top of the CTC foundation metadata. So it's quite a stack, from Financial Services Cloud to the association customizations to manage and just to work through the Salesforce deployments. And with all of that stuff, and with Encino, the deployments are complex, but they're also risky too. If you try to modify Encino fields or some of that kind of stuff, you won't be able to because it's a managed package. So just, the getting the sequencing of it all and figuring out the dependencies is kind of, again, where AutoRABIT just really helps streamline the process. I think without AutoRABIT, we'd have to use like Visual Studio Code or a custom pipeline to using the SF commands to do all the deployments and whatnot. And that would be a lot.
Yeah, and it sounds like one of the things that I know that AutoRABIT plays a central part in the collaboration, so we've kind of established that. But I think what you also just highlighted is the different teams doing different things, which just leads to mistakes, right?
Yeah.
And then you're not able to serve the end customer that you're serving in a timely fashion. So maybe talk a little bit about everybody's got their own way of doing things, right? And devs are particular people, right? They like doing things in their own way. Talk a little bit about like when you introduced AutoRABIT, like how it became the collaborative sort of process.
Yeah. So from the very beginning of our Salesforce development, I wasn't around GreenStone at the very start of our journey with Salesforce, but AutoRABIT, I believe, was. So kind of from the very beginning, AutoRABIT was baked into our process for managing commits, managing the repos and whatnot. And we do have different roles and everything inside AutoRABIT. The devs use it, the VSAs use it. We try to get everyone to use it consistently and use it the same way. And we do have. Go ahead.
There's just more than a notion, right? Just saying, using
Yeah.
it the same way everybody uses it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, developers are used to .NET stuff. They're used to doing the pull request and ADO and merge requests and that kind of stuff. And AutoRABIT's a little bit different, but well, I'll talk about easy commits and some of the benefits of that a little bit later. But there are some benefits AutoRABIT provides to doing the commits and stuff in AutoRABIT versus outside of it.
Fantastic. All right, well, show us how it looks. How does it work?
Yeah. So this is kind of at a high level our setup. So at the very top here is our foundational CTC Dev Sandbox and CTC QA Sandbox. One thing to note is we're constantly looking for ways to improve and make changes. One of the issues since I've been in here is this CTC Dev Sandbox that kind of is foundation for stuff that goes everywhere. We've had anywhere from 25 to 40 people building stuff in there in the same sandbox. And that's caused issues and complexities and stuff, having that many people in one sandbox. So we're looking at building out for each of the development teams their own dev and QA sandbox that would sit across from dev, just to isolate the development and testing and make things a little bit easier and not have people stepping on toes so much. But that's still kind of in the works. But at the moment, what we've done is things start in CTC Dev. When they do a commit through AutoRABIT, the CI job takes it automatically to the QA sandbox. And that's where a lot of our testing is done. We do monthly releases. We have for a few years now. So from the QA sandbox is where I kind of come in for the monthly release process and create the release labels in AutoRABIT and kind of send those along to the associations. So for the setup here, we have the 7 associations in the yellow here, and then each of them have a dev sandbox, a QA sandbox, a UAT sandbox. We have a full copy sandbox that we call UAT full, that has all the data from production and the same size and whatnot. And then we have production at the end there. So that's like 27 sandboxes every month to deploy to, and we're going to add even more in between kind of the UAT full and sandbox, just to have a pre-prod staging environment that only DevOps can deploy to. That's another process improvement we're working on, but we're constantly trying to figure out what we can do to make it better, what can we change, that kind of stuff. So at a high level, this is kind of our Salesforce architecture and setup. So everything from QA goes to all these other sandboxes and prod instances every month.
I have a question that we didn't really talk about beforehand, but maybe just a little bit of anecdotal information. The people that you serve and the people that you deliver for, like, how have they talked about this process, and how comfortable are they with the fact that, this is really complex?
Yeah. So one of the other things I didn't quite mention, so the associations, they do their customizations, but for all of them except for one, Greenstone has development teams that do those customizations. So we're not, for the most part, there's one association that does their own customization at the end. The other one, Greenstone does it for them as well, different development teams. But that kind of makes that handoff a little bit easier. We're not sending it to outside development teams for the most part. But I think, a lot of the associations like the monthly releases. Some of them get a little bit overwhelmed with this sometimes, but then some of them want more, and they use some of the admin plus that comes with Encino. Before Salesforce, we were on CRM and had quarterly releases, I think. So with Salesforce, we went from 4 releases a year to, I think we do 11. We tend to skip December because a lot of people are out and whatnot.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. So one thing that I heard there was, a couple of interesting points, but one thing I heard is that even if you have a consistent process from the organization to organization that you serve, like the business customers you serve, if you do need to create like sort of a customized process for one team or another, there's still consistency that you can manage. There's still governance that you can manage. There's still like a connection to the overall process. I think that's really important.
Yeah, some of the associations that use Admin Plus, we give them access to AutoRABIT. I'll set them up, give them access. They'll do the commits there just like we would. We do try to make sure that no matter who's kind of building stuff in Salesforce, they follow the same process. That consistency is important. Otherwise, you end up kind of wondering why some things happened or where some things went. Things get missed, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and if you have to, solve an issue, like if you have any kind of outage or if you have any kind of like, I don't know, bugs introduced into your process, like tracing those things down, traceability is really important when you have this process.
Yeah, definitely. And between AutoRABIT and then the integration with ADO, I do a lot of troubleshooting sometimes. Where did this feature go? What's going on with it? Was it a merge conflict that maybe the wrong choice was taken or whatnot? So I do a lot of digging in AutoRABIT and in the repo just to look at the branches and see what went where or why something didn't go where. I really enjoy that part of the job, to try to figure out if something is off, why and where it happened, and then updating the process so it doesn't happen again, at least not in the exact same way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. What else would you tell us about the architecture?
Yeah. So the other part, I think most of all the environments are tied to the .NET apps. So they are integrated environments. We do have, I'm not familiar with the .NET apps, but we do have a whole host of them that do stuff, and all the environments are connected and set up. We have SSO enabled for all the environments. We also, are doing. It took us a little while to get into sandbox refreshes, but we are now doing those like once a year, and that's something else I manage that AutoRABIT does help with as well, which I'll talk about towards the end. We did kind of refresh them and make sure they're all on preview instances, so they get that latest release, Salesforce release, which is nice to be able to see it, develop it, but it does cause issues sometimes if whatever is being developed on the new release goes to prod before the new release is there. You can get deployment errors just from Salesforce additions, if they add in a XML tag to a Flexi page or something. But those are usually pretty straightforward to resolve.
All right.
So a little bit about our ADO model. So we have all our repositories in Azure DevOps, which has a good integration with AutoRABIT. We haven't used I've looked at the ALM piece where you can update work statuses from AutoRABIT commits and whatnot. That's kind of on one of the many items on my to-do list to look at, because that does seem neat. But even the standard integration is super helpful. So each association has their own repository. So that's a lot of different repositories in different projects to manage. And that does prove problematic occasionally. And I'll talk about that when we get to the release process. We do have environment-based branching. So, for each sandbox, dev, QA, UAT, there is a corresponding branch in the association repository for it. And one of the nice things about the integration, I think it's on the commit comment, right? If you put pound and then like the ADO work item number, there's an automatic link created to the work item in ADO from AutoRABIT, and that's super helpful, having that integration. And that way I can look at the features and user stories and just see the linked items to it. That's a big help, both for putting releases together and for troubleshooting stuff. To see what commits tied to what work item. One thing that is a little bit different here with the environment-based branching and the association repositories, the foundational metadata that we send out only goes to Salesforce sandboxes. It does not go to the association repositories. And there's a couple of reasons for that, and that decision was made a long time ago. But then the association repositories have stuff the associations have customized and built from scratch in their own sandbox. And it also contains, sometimes they'll take the foundational metadata and they'll customize it. And so that's the only thing in the association repository. So it's not like a one-to-one match for what's in Salesforce. We've talked about making that happen and using that branching baseline feature in AutoRABIT to facilitate that. But that's another thing, just kind of on my to-do list. Yeah, easy commits. So the easy commits are nice for a lot of reasons. One, they provide that same consistent framework for doing commits, right? Also for admins or business system analysts that aren't as technical and aren't used to working with VS Code and Git, right? They don't have to know Git and that kind of stuff, right? There's a nice, very pretty now UI wrapped around the easy commits in AutoRABIT. The other really nice thing that it does is the deployment validation, right? The last thing you want is something committed and then the CI job fails. Then you got to go back and figure out why it failed and get another commit. So that deployment validation is super helpful. Also, the ability to do that against up to 3 orgs is nice. We can't hit every association with it, but we can at least get some, to verify that it would be successful. We've also limited the self-approval of easy commits. So someone has to look at the commit and review it just as part of our process. We don't want anyone just putting their own stuff in there without anyone else looking at it.
Has that slowed your process down at all? And do developers,
I think it does a little bit. I think the developers are kind of used to that though, because they have the approvers in ADO with their merge requests and stuff. And so it does a little bit because, everyone's kind of busy doing development and finding time to review can, take a little bit. But it's so worth it just to, have that extra set of eyes on it. It's easy to miss something, especially when we have so many people in one sandbox. It's easy to also commit someone else's changes,
Yeah, no, I mean, the thing that occurred to me is like, slow and consistent is better than fast and risky. So
yes, absolutely. The other part, I think some of the developers we're trying to get a process around it, is using the Apex test validation consistently and all the time. That's kind of one of our biggest issues on deployments is unit tests, because like most Salesforce instances, our unit tests are system tests, right? Where flows can break stuff or validation rules or other stuff. And with all the customizations the associations do on top of stuff, their customization could break a unit test foundationally. So, trying to get everyone to run the Apex test when they do the commits, just to find those issues earlier rather than later. And then, the last thing I kind of mentioned, just having that traceability between the AutoRABIT commit and then the commit in AGO and then the work item, to be able to follow that chain, both for audit purposes and just for troubleshooting is really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, let's get into the release process. I want to see about how you all have improved things using this new delivery model.
Yeah. So I'll start a little bit so when we first went live with Salesforce, we started to use managed packages. The idea of them is nice. You're deploying the same thing every time, but we have, like, our foundational code base has almost 16,000 pieces of metadata components, and that's a lot to deploy every time. The first release we did with packages took like almost 8 hours to do. I think some of us were on the call until almost 4 a.m. for the deployment to be done. So we kind of pivoted from that fairly early. And we used the release labels in AutoRABIT, which is just the delta, just the things that changed, and that makes the deployments, they're usually less than an hour. Sometimes, that just depends on Salesforce. That's been one of our biggest changes from when we started going live with Salesforce to now. Because now, on a good month, our prod deployments take like 2 hours, 2.5 hours. as opposed to 8 hours. And that's awesome.
Can you say a little bit more about the release labels? I think that's a pretty interesting feature that AutoRABIT offers.
Yeah. So we'll have in ADO, we'll have like our approved work items, right? I'll have a query that says, here's all the work items approved for June. And this is one of the only parts we do outside the AutoRABIT is just a PowerShell script to grab those features and commits. And then I have a list of commits that go to for June, and then plop those into a release label. It's it's nice because, again, it's consistent, right? Once they're in there, you're deploying the same thing everywhere. If I had to try to deploy, I don't know, anywhere from like 30 to 60 commits kind of without that, it'd be really easy to miss one. So yeah, release labels we use extensively. Just to kind of walk through the whole workflow, right? And I mentioned this, if you start in dev and go to QA with the easy commits. And then for the monthly release, once we kind of hit code complete for it, I'll go in, grab the list of features, build the release label. And we kind of changed our process again in the last 6 months, but say last year at this time when we were doing the monthly releases, we'd have the release label with the CGC code and deploy that manually to 27 sandboxes or so, which is a lot. And manually doing it over and over is no good. And I'll go over this in more detail, but we had a contractor that was on board with us for a year that really helped improve that process. And we did add 10 more sandboxes, 10 of them that only DevOps uses. But now, instead of manually deploying to 27 environments every month, we use CI jobs. Which, like we've talked about, right, that reduces errors. It's also a tedious task, right, to just do a deployment and then redeploy and then create another, it's not fun. So letting the CI jobs just fire off and do it is awesome. And again, we kind of get the transparency of what's going where, right? You can look at the CI jobs, you can see the deployment history, you can look at the logs, kind of have, the gated checkpoints, right? Not everyone can create the release labels and do those merges and kick off the CI jobs. And it just kind of minimizes risk too. That's kind of a consistent theme, right? Is being able to automate this stuff, reduces manual effort, it saves time, it, reduces risk. It just makes the process smoother. One other thing I didn't mention, we have a total of 5 development teams building stuff. So it can be a lot of work sometimes every month. I think for a couple of projects, we have run into that 100 commit limit on release labels. But we use AutoRABIT to work around that even. We'll build the 2 release labels, combine the package XML, and then we can just do a deployment from Salesforce org to Salesforce org using that package XML. And, that fortunately doesn't happen too often, but you get large projects and a lot of people working on it, you can hit that 100 commit limit.
Smart.
Yeah, so some of the other nice benefits are here's like the tracking, right? The CI jobs. When we do the prod deployment, we do that is a manual deployment for us. We just want to have that fine-grained control over the prod deployment and when it goes. We do have a prod validation job that we run just to find any potential deployment night issues earlier in the process. I don't like surprises on deployment night, and then just the support for all the orgs and sandboxes we have in AutoRABIT. I'll show it in our next slide, but for our monthly release process, we currently utilize 40 CI jobs, like just for every month. We talked about this a little bit too, right? It wouldn't take a ton to scale it in AutoRABIT. It'd be a new Salesforce org, it'd be registering a new repo, some new branches and user permissions. And some new CI jobs, but then bam, they're in the pipeline, they get the foundation code, and scaling it up wouldn't be a large effort or anything.
And you have a flow you're going to show us, yeah?
Yeah, yep. I'm going to switch screens in a second. Just over on the right here, this is the list of all the CI jobs kind of by association that we use every month. And even outside of the monthly releases, we have an additional like 70, 75 CI jobs that we manage for various other things.
Hey, for those playing at home, Joe, the images are a little small. Maybe just kind of walk us through that flow.
Yeah, I'm going to switch my screen here. And this should look a lot better. Okay. Yeah, how's this look?
So I don't see anything new quite yet. Or okay. Now I don't see the. Okay, yeah, there we go. That's much better.
Okay, just took a minute. Yeah, a little bit more detail here. One thing about our monthly release process is, AutoRABIT helps it, streamlines it, makes it quicker, but it is complicated. There's no way, I don't think, with the setup we have at GreenStone to make it simple. We have 8 instances. One of them sends its metadata to the other 7. They have their own code on top of it. Like, it's going to be complicated, right? And so this is kind of our new deployment process where we use the CI jobs to do the deployments. We also, with the old deployment process, we would, on the prod deployment nights, we would deploy the CTC, the foundation monthly release, and then we would deploy the association monthly release in separate release labels, right? Because they're in different repositories, and that makes combining the commits and stuff difficult, but not impossible. We came up with a solution for that in AutoRABIT, which I'll get to here in a minute, to have one combined release label on the prod deployment night that has the foundation code plus the association code. And that's nice. In addition to the CI jobs, it saves us about an hour on every prod deployment night, and that's awesome. Anytime you can save, in the evenings is good. All right, so here we go. So we start the day after code complete, right? I get the list of features from ADO, create a release label from our CTC QA branch. And then we take that and we merge it into, we'll use GreenStone as an example here. The other associations have their own association-specific version of this. But then we merge it into the GS CTC release branch. This is a branch that only DevOps sees, that the development teams don't care about it, don't touch it or anything. So we're at that point, we're merging the CTC code to, actually that's wrong. Yeah, merging it to that branch and doing a validate against the corresponding sandbox, right? Even with this new model and the updates, we still follow the branching and sandbox model, where it's kind of a one-to-one. And then assuming that, it validates to that GS sandbox, then, okay, so that should be the full. So once we get it via CI job to the GS CTC dev sandbox, right? This is where we have our workaround for kind of combining stuff. And I misspoke earlier. This should be our CTC full branch here. So at this point, it's still in the CTC repo, and then we deploy it to a GS sandbox, right? And then at that point, you have the foundation code and a GS sandbox. We have CI jobs that will deploy it to all of them. And this is where we kind of worked around having different repositories for the associations and trying to combine releases. Moving the commits in Git or ADO from one repo to another is not an easy thing or even very feasible. So what we do, once we have the CTC monthly release in the new GS CTC dev sandbox, we download the package XML, and then we do an easy commit to that same branch, right? And then, so at that point, I'm going to scroll down a little bit here. So at that point, right, the GS CTC dev branch it's in the GS repo, and it has the CTC monthly release, right? So that's kind of the first part in doing the combined release label. So we'll let that, and we do that for each association, right? We do kind of repeat that for each one. And then, so at that point, then we take the association monthly release, right? And that already lives in their repo, right? That's built from the QA branch. And we take that, and we do the same thing, right? Where we merge that to that GS CTC dev branch, and then it goes to the sandbox, right? And then at that point, we have in that GS CTC dev branch, we have the CTC foundational monthly release, and we have the association GreenStone, in this case, monthly release. They're all in one branch. And from there, you can create a release label that has both of them, you know? And then from that point, and this is where the CI jobs really kind of shine in the process and take over a lot of the deployments. We have another branch, a GS CTC merge branch, where we take that combined release label and merge it to, and then from there, CI jobs will blast it out to all the association sandboxes, which is represented up here. It's an easy merge request, right, from that release label in the, say, GS CTC dev branch to the GS CTC merge branch. That'll do a validation against, the UAT sandbox, against prod, against our UAT full sandbox, just to make sure all those CI jobs will be successful. And then from there, off it goes to the CI jobs again. Just take it everywhere and deploy it there. And then our monthly deployments are generally on Thursdays. So kind of the Monday before, because I know there's an expiration for the quick deploys. I'm not sure what it is. I don't know if it's 10 days now, but the Monday before our Thursday prod release, Monday morning, I'll do a prod validation, like manually, just to double check to have the quick deploy option ready. It doesn't necessarily make it a quick deploy, but it does save some time, the Salesforce quick deploy option. And that's a Salesforce feature, but it does save anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes on the production deployment night, which is, always kind of looking for ways to save time and get people offline before, 9, 10 p.m. So that's kind of, at a high level, how our monthly release process looks like and flows. And
so I think one thing that maybe folks are thinking about, I'm certainly thinking about it, is how do you talk about the impact to your business that this is offering you, and really from the perspective of not just like, let me not minimize it.
Yeah.
It's great that you can get your dev teams in a consistent process. They know how long it's going to take to do the deploys. They're not going to be there all night. You're, basically releasing on a monthly, not basic, but you're releasing on a monthly cadence, which means that, people kind of know how to manage their work process. But like, what impact has it had for your end customer? Like, why is this improving your business at GreenStone?
Yeah. So it allows us to do the monthly releases. I think if we didn't have this process, and if this monthly release process took longer than it does, maybe we do every other month releases. It allows us to get features in front of them for UAT quicker. It allows us to get the features to prod quicker. So the enhancements, the projects that they want from us, we can get to them quicker. Quicker than 4 times a year. It's kind of that speed. And it's kind of like speed at scale, right? Because we have so many solutions and so many development teams. Well,
that's fascinating. Yeah, the speed to market is certainly really important. But something else that I think is interesting that you mentioned is that you can get UAT in front of them faster, so then they can give you feedback to make sure that what you're delivering actually meets their need.
Yep. And like the UAT and UAT full sandbox, they use those for training sometimes too. So having that environment that's up to date with stuff, that can quickly be updated, for documentation and learning and development resources, and just, having that available to them is helpful.
Well, I mean, it's a really good example of and technology enabling you to move faster and delivering at scale, having the control in your environment that you need, having the predictability, like all those things are super important to businesses that, that are of your size, and even larger.
Yeah. Yeah. It would just be, probably not possible to do monthly releases without have this set up with AutoRABIT with all the associations and sandboxes and everything. It's a lot. Yeah.
So there's a little bit about Encino that you included, and maybe explain a little bit about what Encino does for you all.
Yep. I think I have one other slide before that real quick, but I do have the Encino slide up next.
Oh, right. I'm sorry.
It's all right. This is just kind of a little bit about our AutoRABIT instance. We do have our own instance. We're on the automatic upgrades, but we're like 2 weeks behind the current release. So we have more than 50 users in our AutoRABIT instance. We have more than 50 Salesforce orgs in it. We have multiple roles and permissions and things set up, for senior devs versus junior BSAs that they don't necessarily see the same thing. I switched my screen. Thank you, Nicole. Sorry about that. All right, let me just give this a minute to take. Wait, that's the wrong one.
Well, I appreciate you going into the other view because, as we talked about, that was a little small. So
yeah,
it helped, make it, sort of easier for people to digest and consume. So thank you for doing that.
Yep. Is it back to the full PowerPoint yet?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay.
Oh, well, now we can't, but maybe that's me with the lag.
It's going to take a minute. Yeah.
Yeah, we're good now.
Okay, cool. Yeah, sorry about that. So yeah, we have more than 50 users, 50 orgs in there. A lot of different roles in our IS department have access. It allows us to provide guardrails on what people can do. Not everyone has access to the deployment tab. For a long time, not everyone could do the Encino feature management deployments. Not everyone can create CI jobs or do easy merges, that kind of stuff. And there are some things that we're looking into adopting and whatnot. We're looking at the external pull request, right? So that way the developers would kind of have a similar workflow, whether it's Salesforce or .NET development. We use Data Loader Pro occasionally for getting some testing data right from prod to UAT, and then being able to kind of mask that and get that into a sandbox for testing purposes.
I think what's fascinating is that this structure, should you at some point decide to go into autonomous development or AI driven development, it would still be really helpful. You'd still have the controls in place, right? And so, I mean, the foundation that everybody always, talks about with respect to AI is data, but I think governance is a super important foundation to have on top of that.
Yes, completely agree there. Yeah, and then the last piece here. So there's two parts to the Encino that we use. So there's the feature management, right, which comes with a bunch of standard templates that you guys work with Encino on and you guys provide. We also have more than 50 custom feature management templates for different things. And one of my favorite things about the feature management option in AutoRABIT is doing these data deployments. You don't have to use Excel and VLOOKUPs anymore. It's been a long time since I did that, but I remember not enjoying it when doing data deployments from sandbox to prod and keeping all the IDs in sync, and it can get cumbersome to do. And with the feature management, AutoRABIT just handles it, takes care of it. We don't have to worry about the record ID changing and that kind of stuff. So that's really nice. And then the other part is the RBC CI jobs. They're not quite like the traditional metadata CI jobs, but they are very helpful, especially with our setup of having so many sandboxes and environments and whatnot. My favorite part there is that second bullet point. You can have a CI job and then deploy it to one org, and the post deployment can send it up to 5 different orgs. So with one run, you can deploy to 6 environments, which is cool. We use a lot of filters when we do the feature management deployments. We don't just like deploy everything, right? So when we build the RBC CI jobs, there's a little bit of work to, take the individual queries and like combine them and get them in the RBC CI job. But the time it saves both in the sandbox deployment and prod deployment is well worth it. Especially if we have, say if we have like 2 foundational RBCs going in a month, right? And sandboxes, that's what 27. It's like 52 deployments if we were to not use the CI job, and then on the production deployment night, that's 7 deployments. But with the CI jobs, it's just it's 2 on production night, and I don't know the math, but it's a lot less in the sandboxes. Being able to do 6 at a time, so and it saves a lot of just manual redeployments and clicking the same button over and over again. No one likes to do that, so that's really awesome. And then the other kind of use case for the CI jobs, the RBC CI jobs, the I guess future deployment ones, is bringing down. We have our dev sandbox and QA are just dev sandboxes, so bringing down the records from prod to those sandboxes, we use the feature management CI jobs, and it makes that process significantly easier, more streamlined, quicker. Again, it's not manual, so there's less risk of missing an object or getting a connection wrong between the records. So the Encino piece we use a lot, and I think that's one of the features that's kind of unique to AutoRABIT is that deep integration you guys have with Encino, and we definitely appreciate it.
Yeah, no, we do a lot with Encino. I was just going to say on the comment about VLOOKUPs, there are those who really love them, and I'm in the camp with you. Didn't love them.
Yeah.
If there's any lessons that you maybe just three lessons that you could leave the audience with respect to scaling DevOps for Salesforce, what would you share?
So the biggest one is probably like automation, right? If you have a single org and like maybe a dev and UAT and prod, it's one thing to do like more manual deployments, but as the complexity grows, both of the deployments and like the sandbox and orgs and stuff, having automation is critical. Otherwise you're stuck kind of doing the same thing over and over, and it's tedious and manual. And one of the other big things is having the audit and traceability in AutoRABIT, just to see what went where when, both for troubleshooting purposes and just for audit purposes, and having the governance kind of that goes along with that, right? We don't allow everyone that has access to our AutoRABIT instance the ability to just do anything in there, so we have gates between environments, and AutoRABIT kind of, helps facilitate that.
Well, listen, I really appreciate this conversation, and I think if we can ask for questions, I'm not sure if there's any questions. I can't see the chat. I'm not sure if there's any questions in the chat or if there's anybody in the audience who wants to ask a question. I think we can take those now.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe if you want to type a question in the chat, we'll ask one more time. If you want to type your question, drop it in the chat, and we can review it there. I see some high fives. That's great. Thank you for that. So I think if there aren't any questions, Joe, you've graciously offered to share contact information. So I think that's there's a way to get in touch with you on our last slide here.
Yeah. I'm happy if you have questions about just kind of growing the Salesforce DevOps and that whole world, or anything I've talked about. I'm always happy to talk about what I do. I enjoy it, and happy to help where I can.
Well, this is the way that we think we can help too, like having conversations with folks that are out there in the field, doing the work, challenging us to, make the product better, and also just sharing how you're making use of the product to improve your business. I mean, that's really all that we can ask for. So we really do appreciate this time with you, Joe, and thank you for talking with us today.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
All right.
Sorry, guys, I want to cut in just really quick. We did have a question come in. Do you have a parallel release path, like example, June release in one environment path and July in the other, and how the merging process is handled post-June production?
Yeah. So at the moment, we do not. That's part of some of the improvements we're looking at is release branches. I've talked with one of the senior devs about implementing release branches. Unfortunately, all of our development, whether it be for the June release or the August release at the moment, is in that CDC Dev Sandbox, or it's in the Association Dev Sandbox. That is something that we want to get away from, but that's how it is at the moment.
All right, understood. Nicole, were there any other questions that you saw come in?
I'm not seeing any others, but we do have a couple of minutes if anybody wanted to drop anything else in there. Other than that, we appreciate everybody joining us today. And Joe, thank you so much.
Yes.
All right. I guess if that's all, then we'll close out. Thanks everybody for joining us.
There's one more.
There is one more.
Question. It's a good question. So we don't use CodeScan. I do love the question though. So for the Salesforce stuff, we don't have any code scans in the pipeline. Code scans at the moment. Again, one of the things on my list is to at least set up an Apex PMD file, so that way that could do the static code analysis on the easy commit. That's something we want to get to. Just haven't yet.
All right. Well, I think that may be it. I finally got to the right place where I could see the questions, so I wasn't seeing them earlier. All right. Well, we are right about 5 minutes before the top of the hour. So I think if there's nothing else, we'll close out. And again, thank you all for joining. We really appreciate you joining today. And Joe, thank you for presenting.
Yes, you're welcome.
All righty. Thanks all.
Bye.